News First, Newsline Prime with Araz Shaukat Ali.
A very good evening and welcome to Newsline Prime. We're coming to you live and direct from the Newsfirst studios here in Colombo. Of course, your usual guest Araz Shaukat Ali is out. I'm Sharlan Benedict and I will be sitting in for him today. Let's get right to it, to introducing our guest this evening on Newsline Prime. We've got quite an eminent individual seated here with me in the studio, and before I introduce him to you especially, let me give a bit of a background into him. He is, of course, a former diplomat. He is a UN legal expert, and he is also a former ambassador of Sri Lanka. Sri Lankans faced quite a lot of controversial issues in the past, especially in the legal sphere of this country, and to shed light on these matters, we have in the studios with us today attorney at law D.L. Mendis. A very good evening, sir, and welcome to the show.
It's a pleasure indeed to be here.
So, getting right to it, one of the most controversial issues that we had in the past is the 19th Amendment to the Constitution. Now, of course, the Constitution is the supreme law of the country.
Yes.
And this year has rightfully been branded as an election year. And speaking about these election candidates, one argument that came into the limelight is the fact that former President Mahinda Rajapaksa, in fact, can contest the elections this year, despite him serving 2 terms and despite the 19th Constitutional Amendment limiting the term of a president of Sri Lanka to 2 terms in office. The argument being that the 19th Amendment does not apply retrospectively, but prospectively. You are a legal expert, you are a legal draftsman. What is your opinion on this matter?
The issue of prospective and retrospective has been a thorny issue in legislation. Generally, you can pass retrospective legislation. Even the Constitution in Article 75 provides for retrospective legislation. Whether the legislation is prospective or retrospective is looked at from the content of the legislation, what was intended to be. And therefore, I begin to feel that it was passed to catch up even those who have served 2 terms. But it cannot be said that it applies only prospectively. It has something to do with the past as well.
So, sir, in your expert opinion regarding this, who is supposed to determine the intention of Parliament when it comes to these kind of events?
The final say is with the courts. But there are certain types of retrospective legislations not allowed by our Constitution. We have seen it in the past as well. Legislation which of retroactive nature, which make offences which are not offences at the time of commission. We saw the decision in Queen versus Leonagale some years ago, before you were born. I can still remember that case, where the court held such legislation which was part ad hoc, ad hominem, ex post facto, is inconsistent or violates the doctrine of separation of powers. So I feel there are certain times, certain legislation may be valid retrospectively, sometimes they are not valid. They are not valid retrospectively. So I can't give you specific answers, but the courts will decide this matter when it comes before them.
Definitely. Now, moving on from that to the bigger picture, actually, Sri Lanka faced quite a bit of a fix when we attended the Human Rights Council sessions earlier this year in Geneva. Of course, the issue of Geneva seems to have died down, but inevitably it will return in 2 years, because a resolution was passed against Sri Lanka at this summit, and it was not passed against Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka co-sponsored the resolution, and we asked for the extension of 2 more years. So this will come back. So, sir, you are a UN legal expert. Could you give us a bit of a background as to your expertise in the UN?
Yes, in the UN, there are something called treaties and non-treaty instruments. Treaties can be multilateral, bilateral, or plurilateral. They are between states or between states and international organizations. They are binding on states if they have ratified them or acceded to them, and the consent is the basis of that commitment. We in Latin call it pacta sunt servanda. But in regard to non-treaty instruments like resolutions of international organizations, like the Security Council, resolutions of IMO, ICAO, where I served for some years as a legislative specialist for ICAO in Montreal. In these situations, they are still binding, although there is no consent from the particular state, you know. So because these have a binding effect. So Geneva resolution is of that level. They are binding on us, even if we have not given the consent to it, or irrespective whether we have co-sponsored or not. The majority of the council votes, then it will stand and bind us.
But in any case, consent is not the question here. We have co-sponsored the resolution, so technically we have given our consent to this issue. And the question here is really, now politicians come before the people, especially members of the current government as well. They come before the people and they say, we will not allow foreign judges to come into the country, we will not allow them to prosecute our war heroes. But when it came to the time when this resolution was initially passed, they co-sponsored it. Did they not know about the content of the resolution at the time? Was that the issue?
I think you are saying something very controversial in this country. I must say the government has given effect to some of the aspects of the resolution. There are some pieces of legislation which are good in a sense that it will contribute to what is called transitional justice. But the two main controversial issues which has not been resolved is accountability. Accountability is finding no person should go unpunished for any violations of the law. What is the law applicable here is a major issue. When I served as legal advisor to the international ICRC, International Committee of the Red Cross in the 1990s, I can remember I drafted the what is called the Geneva Conventions Act. I shuttled between here and Geneva, and I remember meeting the best of experts in the field, and then at the time they knew Sri Lanka has what is called a non-international armed conflict, which is not defined in the Geneva Conventions, but if you read the commentaries of Jean Pictet, who was instrumental in drafting the Geneva Conventions, he says these are the ingredients which constitutes non-international armed conflict. And on the basis we included the common Article 3. If anybody has committed any violations under common Article 3, which deals with non-international, it was there in the original act. I can give you my original draft, which I did in consultation with Geneva. I shuttled and brought it back, and it took another 4 or 5 years to go through Parliament. By that time I had gone as an ambassador to Austria, and it was passed in the year 2006. So there are two things. We have to have some amendment to the Geneva Convention, because this is what we have is a non-international armed conflict, and it has to be borne in mind. Under non-international armed conflict, which is very important to mention, that killing is justified as long as it's done within the rules of IHL, International Humanitarian Law, which is the law that is the law of war. Pictet used the word humanitarian because it curtails the conduct of hostilities in accordance with the law, so they call it IHL in 1947. So that is the origin of the word international humanitarian law.
So I'd like to focus your attention to one of the specific inclusions in this resolution, and that is the appointment of foreign judges.
Yes.
Now there is an argument that Sri Lanka's constitution does not allow for foreign judges to sit in a Sri Lankan court of law.
Yes.
So how does the government plan to come about this if they plan to do right by the resolution that they co-sponsored, and did the government not know about this when they did co-sponsor the resolution back in 2015?
Perhaps they may not discover that it may have been inconsistent, but the issue of inconsistency has been brought forward in the last session by our learned foreign minister, who is himself an international lawyer, and he has served the international organizations, and he has said so that it may collide the appointment of foreign judges with the sections dealing with sovereignty of the people. You understand?
Yes.
So it is a matter. But if it is so, there is the question under the VCLT, which is the Vienna Convention of the Law of Treaties, 69, it says there's a section in that to say that if any of the provisions of a treaty or a non-treaty instruments cannot be implemented under section Article 46, which collides with the fundamental principle of constitutional importance, the country may give effect to some other foray which is within their constitutional framework.
Okay.
So this is the provision which I think a book has been written by a former Nigerian judge to the International Court of Justice, T.O. Elias, on this particular article. And I begin to think it has never been cited so far by any of our jurists or writers on international law and treaty law especially. So if you're relying on that, you have to show to the court or to anybody, to the international community, that the appointment of foreign judges or appointment of legal counsel to conduct any violations of the IHL or war crimes or whatever you call it cannot be done except through our own courts. They have to show that there is some legal impediment which is justifiable under a constitutional order. So that matter has been just put up at the last meeting, and you have to read the international law and its relation to constitutional law and see whether there is an inconsistency or whether the establishment of foreign tribunal is a fundamental constitutional issue which cannot be given effect to by legislation.
Well, we've seen Sri Lanka have a bit of a wary strategy when it comes to handling affairs of government.
Yes.
But when it comes to international affairs, such an approach to international affairs could have detrimental effects on the country.
Yes, I do.
So when it comes to this Geneva issue in Geneva specifically, what we've got again is simply a 2-year extension. At the end of 2 years, another report will be presented by the Human Rights High Commissioner in Geneva on Sri Lanka, and if we have not fulfilled the obligations in this resolution, we will be penalized for that again.
Yes, I mean, that is so. You know, we are a very small state, and we need to comply with international norms and standards. I do agree with you, but we cannot at this stage, I believe, it is not easy for us to withdraw from the Human Rights Council, because it is a difficult task, I mean, if I may say so, because you have to have a strategy, not like, we cannot behave like a very powerful state. We are a very small state, a weak state in military terms. We are what is called a little better than a mini state in the international system. But we have a vote, the same as a larger state. But if all these small states get together and pass a resolution in the United Nations General Assembly, it might have an effect. Not otherwise. We cannot wringle out or extricate ourselves from this in an easy manner. There will be repercussions in regard to this matter. I think we must do some little work on it and form a strategy. If we cannot give effect to the resolution, they're not the whole of resolution, a resolution relating to articles of the resolution, by cogent legal arguments which are acceptable to the international community.
Do you believe the Sri Lankan government is in the process of drafting or of making these cogent legal arguments to be presented?
I didn't see any cogent arguments so far. Had I been there, I would have advised them to go on a particular track, because I have seen it in other countries. Some resolutions, the IMO, such as the ICAO not being given effect. I was in Pakistan some years ago with the ICAO drafting and giving effect to ICAO resolution, as the aviation, International Aviation Organization. There they had to comply with it. These resolutions of the ICAO, being a very powerful state, a nuclear power, they did comply with it, and they gave effect to some of the international conventions like the Hague, Tokyo, and I was spent very unforgettable years in Islamabad and Karachi, and they gave me free travel in the airlines, and I went to Gilgit, a beautiful place in the northern parts of Pakistan, and I enjoyed, and ultimately I even wore the Shalwar kameez because I got a little attracted to how they treated me with dignity, and as a legal expert coming from the ICAO.
Has the Sri Lankan government approached you?
No, she had not approached me. They have asked my views. Probably they don't know me, that I'm here, even I don't know. But I think there has to be a far more
coordinated response.
Deep strategy. If we are to extricate ourselves from this requirement of accountability in the way it is written into the Geneva resolutions, because there has to be legal arguments at international level under the VCLT 1969, which is the Article 46. There is Travaux Préparatoires dealing with the VCLT, which I have read it a couple of times in relation to other countries as legal advisor, regional as then also we have to show there is a real constitutional impediment that forbids Sri Lanka to take this line, you know. So that is why in 1999 I went to Geneva and then moved that amendment to the. That was the best approach, I think. I still have that.
At the time you were serving
as ICRC legal advisor to the local office. So I can remember, and at the same time I also drafted the 17th Amendment to the Constitution. And you may not believe me, I'm coming on air to tell you that I drafted the 17th Amendment not in Colombo but in Jaffna, in a beautiful house, because I couldn't go out of the house after 6 o'clock. So I took these drafting to Jaffna and did all my work under a lamp, because even the lights were not used at that place. A beautiful house I like to revisit one day. I can't remember the place even now.
So, of course, through your years of experience now, as you said, you were a person who drafted the 17th Constitutional Amendment. Speaking about the 19th Constitutional Amendment, again, the manner in which it was passed was questioned on a number of occasions.
Yes.
There were allegations that it was one copy that was passed in Parliament, it was a different copy that was sent to the Supreme Court for their opinion, and that the committee stage amendments were not included in the 19th Amendment. These sort of irregularities, what kind of a detrimental effect do they have?
Yes, I don't know the exact, I was not here at the time, I was abroad, what sort of committee stage amendments were moved. But moving committee stage amendments to any bill is a little bit of a controversial issue, as you know. Erskine May and Griffith, famous Professor Griffith, writes on this, and it says that 8 points, I remember citing to a politician in the Barbados once, and you cannot go beyond the scope of the published bill. But we don't have those restrictions written into our standing orders, unfortunately. But in those countries, they strictly adhere that you can't go beyond the scope and the content of the draft legislation. And in Sri Lanka, it is very necessary, because after the bill has been enacted by Parliament, its constitutionality cannot be questioned. We have what is called pre-judicial review of legislation, pre-judicial review prior to enactment, whereas in most countries the post-enactment judicial review. But we have the other way about. So once it is enacted, even if it is inconsistent with the Constitution, there is nothing that you can do about it. So there has to be some more guidelines or restrictions or rules regarding committee stage amendment.
There are certain allegations that these loopholes in procedure, if you may call it, result in certain political parties or politicians to bring in amendments through the back door. What is your response to this?
That is always the case, not only in Sri Lanka, in many places they do that. They bring in amendments, sometimes not right. Sometimes the amendments do not reflect the object and the purpose of the act. So I think we should take some action, and there must be strong provisions or practice in the system to prevent going beyond the scope of the act by way of committee stage amendments. This is a very vexed issue, and I don't want to deal too much with it because I'm not a parliamentarian, but I watched many parliaments, from Papua New Guinea to St. Kitts to I've seen good parliamentarians. Bahamas, I've watched in many countries in Africa, West Africa.
So in your expert opinion, judging the current Parliament of Sri Lanka, how does it compare to these other parliaments that you visited?
Conduct is not as good as some of them. I thought the best speakers were here. When I went to Africa, I found also very good speakers, and they went clause by clause when they were presenting a bill. The minister, I can remember in Sierra Leone, Abdoulaye Conte, who was an Oxford scholar, and he was my Minister of Law, and he later became a judge in Belize, and he was tipped to be even the Secretary General of the United Nations, if not for the collapse of Sierra Leone. He was tipped at the time. He was an Olympic runner and everything, and that particular man, when he presented bills, I learned from him a lot. He analyzed section by section to the Parliament, and I was so amazed that I learned from them more than I gave them. And I was very fortunate to be in that position in Sierra Leone as first parliamentary council
So
at that time.
the primary duty of a parliamentarian is to draft legislation,
Yeah.
laws that will govern the
No,
people.
the parliamentarians don't draft legislation.
I beg your pardon.
It is the executive that is called the Office of the Parliamentary Council.
Okay.
But today in Sri Lanka, a lot of people draft legislation. Some of them do not understand mechanics of legislative drafting. You must always have a man who has gone through the mill of legislative drafting, even if you set up a committee, because of that large number of bills that were drafted has gone to the waste paper basket, because there has to be person knowledgeable in drafting acts. It's a form of communication very different to other forms of writing. I mean, if you read Thornton, if you read Crabb, and I met almost all of them, the best legal experts in the field on this subject. And I teach, as you know, you're my student at the law college. You understand my teaching of legislative drafting and statutory interpretation. I teach this in a more scientific manner, out of experience and out of academic and textual methods which I'm using, which I use in most areas, even in far-off places like Suriname. You might wonder, I gave a talk in Suriname. Most people wouldn't have gone here on legislative drafting and statutory interpretation. So I think we are in a world today, these are of fundamental importance.
And is Sri Lanka paying enough attention or giving
I
priority
don't think
to
so,
this?
because legislative infrastructure is as important as physical infrastructure. If you don't have proper legislative infrastructure, our development process can be halted.
It's not only, we don't only see this issue.
Legislative drafter is a developer. He is a problem solver. He is not a scrivener or a scribe to be dispensed with. After many years of work, he can contribute to a system which can be of tremendous value. And our politicians, I'm sad to say, don't understand the basics of legislative drafting and even quoting Tacitus. I remember it makes former first parliamentary council during Thatcher's regime. I was on a short stint of training. He told me, he cited Tacitus as an old ancient Roman scholar and said it makes a lot of years to make a good drafter. It makes a lot of, you can't become a drafter repente suddenly. You know, you can't make it suddenly. So that is where I think our fault lies. As a result, you know, a lot of bills have reached the waste paper basket, and they were waste of time. Waste of time.
Of course, these issues can be discussed for quite a long time, but unfortunately, we have come to the end of the
cows
show.
come home.
But sir, one final question to you.
Yeah.
Taking into consideration Sri Lanka's commitments to the international community,
Yeah.
in your expert view, how should we move forward to successfully get through these challenges?
Yes, I think there are two extremes. Some people say you must implement the Geneva resolution to a T. That means fully, as it stands.
Without any reservation.
The other thing that we must forget it, all thing, and withdraw. But as an international person who has worked in different countries, I would like to take the middle path. There should be some accountability, and I don't want to disclose to it. Both sides committed war crimes, there is no question. I have investigated a lot during my time. I served at ICRC, legal advisor. So there must be some accountability, unless there is an amnesty or what we call truth and commission and finds a new direction.
Okay.
There has to be this thing, or both should operate against those who do not come before truth and reconciliation to be prosecuted. And they are not only the soldiers, there are others also in the rebel groups who committed these violations. So the world must know that it has been the practice in many South American countries where I lived. They have had both systems operating, and our system seems to not looking beyond the shores of Sri Lanka.
Of course, it is quite important. It's quite important that the world sees the measures that Sri Lanka has been taking, and that she sees that Sri Lanka is in fact transitioning into a democratic state following quite a long civil war, and that this war has come to an end.
Yes.
That reconciliation is being properly implemented in this country, and of course we will like to have you once again on one of our shows to discuss these issues in depth. Thank you very much, sir, for joining us today, and thank you very much to all our viewers out there for tuning in.
Thank you very much indeed.
Of course, we will meet you again tomorrow at the same time, same place. Take care, and God bless. Until then.
Thank you.